There's a moment when every leader faces the same brutal choice. A crossroads where idealism meets reality, where noble intentions collide with human nature. And in that moment, you discover something that will either make you or destroy you. The comfortable lie that people want to be led with kindness. The harsh truth that they respond to something else entirely. 500 years ago, a man named Niccolò Machiavelli understood this choice better than anyone. Not because he was cruel, but because he watched kingdoms crumble under leaders who believed in fairy tales. He saw princes who trusted in love get betrayed by the very people they tried to protect. He witnessed rulers who chose compassion over control lose everything they swore to defend. And from those ashes, he wrote the most controversial leadership manual in human history. Not to celebrate cruelty, but to reveal something most people refuse to accept. That leadership isn't about being liked. It's about being effective. That power isn't about winning hearts. It's about commanding respect. That if you want to truly serve others, you must first master the art of being feared. This isn't about becoming a tyrant. This is about understanding the machine of human behavior. Because when you strip away the pleasant lies we tell ourselves about human nature, when you look past the surface of what people say they want, you discover something unsettling. People don't follow the leader they love. They follow the leader they believe can protect them. They don't respect kindness. They respect strength. They don't trust compassion. They trust competence. Machiavelli didn't invent this reality. He simply had the courage to name it. While others wrote about how leaders should behave in a perfect world, he wrote about how they must behave in the real one. While others crafted theories for saints, he crafted strategies for survivors. Because he understood something that modern leadership books still refuse to admit. The world doesn't reward the good. It rewards the effective. Most people misunderstand what Machiavelli actually taught. They think he said, "Be cruel for cruelty's sake." They think he advocated for mindless brutality. They think he wanted leaders to terrorize their people into submission. But that's not what he wrote. What he wrote was far more sophisticated, far more strategic, and far more useful than that simplistic interpretation. Machiavelli said if you could be both feared and loved, that would be ideal. But since that combination is nearly impossible to achieve, fear is more reliable than love. Not because fear is better, but because fear is predictable. Love is conditional, emotional, changeable. Fear is constant, rational, controllable. Love depends on the other person's mood. Fear depends on their survival instinct. Think about it. When someone loves you, they can fall out of love. When someone fears you, that fear doesn't disappear because they're having a bad day. Love makes people feel comfortable enough to take risks, including the risk of betraying you. Fear makes people cautious, calculating, careful. Love is a gift they can withdraw. Fear is a reality they cannot ignore. This is why Machiavelli studied Cesare Borgia, not as a monster, but as a master strategist. Borgia inherited a chaotic region called Romagna, where weak leaders had let lawlessness flourish. The people were suffering under criminals and corrupt officials. Previous rulers had tried to win hearts through generosity and forgiveness. The result was anarchy. Borgia took a different approach. He appointed a ruthless administrator named Ramiro di Orco to restore order. Di Orco was brutal, efficient, uncompromising. He crushed the criminal networks, eliminated corruption, established law and order. The people hated the methods, but they couldn't argue with the results. For the first time in years, they could walk the streets safely. But Borgia understood something crucial about fear-based leadership. If you use fear without purpose, it becomes tyranny. If you use fear without limits, it becomes hatred. And hatred is far more dangerous than love could ever be. So once order was established, once the region was stable, Borgia made a shocking move. He had Ramiro di Orco executed in the public square, his body cut in half and displayed for everyone to see. This wasn't random violence. This was calculated communication. Borgia was telling his people two things simultaneously. First, that he was powerful enough to eliminate anyone who threatened their safety, even his own administrators. Second, that he was just enough to punish those who had oppressed them, even when those people worked for him. The message was clear. Fear me, but trust that I will use that fear to protect you, not exploit you. The result was something remarkable. The people of Romagna didn't love Borgia, but they didn't hate him either. They respected him. They followed him. They believed in his capacity to maintain the order they desperately needed. Fear had accomplished what love never could. It had created stability, security, and loyalty, based not on emotion, but on results. This is the distinction most people miss when they criticize Machiavellian leadership. There's a difference between being feared and being hated. Fear can coexist with respect, with trust, even with gratitude. Hatred cannot. Fear says you have the power to harm me, but you choose not to unless I threaten what you protect. Hatred says you want to harm me regardless of what I do. Fear creates predictable behavior. Hatred creates desperate rebellion. Machiavelli understood that effective leaders must sometimes choose actions that look cruel in the moment, but serve a greater purpose. That sometimes being kind to one person means being harsh to another. That sometimes preventing a small injustice requires committing what others might call a larger one. That sometimes the most compassionate thing you can do is something that doesn't look compassionate at all. Modern leadership theory struggles with this reality. It wants to believe that authentic leadership means always being your nicest self. That emotional intelligence means never making anyone uncomfortable. That true strength comes from vulnerability and openness. These aren't necessarily wrong, but they're incomplete. They work when you're managing people who already want to follow you. They fall apart when you're dealing with people who don't. The harsh truth is that not everyone responds to kindness. Some people interpret kindness as weakness. Some people see compassion as an opportunity to exploit. Some people mistake patience for indecision, forgiveness for foolishness, mercy for cowardice. These people don't need a friend. They need a force they cannot manipulate, cannot ignore, cannot overcome. This doesn't mean you become a monster. It means you become something more complex, more strategic, more effective than pure kindness allows. You become someone who can be gentle with those who deserve gentleness and steel with those who require steel. Someone who can show mercy when mercy serves the greater good and display strength when strength is what the moment demands. Fear-based leadership isn't about creating terror. It's about creating certainty. Certainty that there are consequences for destructive behavior. Certainty that those consequences will be swift, proportional, and unavoidable. Certainty that the leader has both the will and the capability to enforce the standards that keep everyone else safe. When people know exactly what happens when they cross certain lines, most of them never cross those lines. When people understand that their leader won't hesitate to act when action is necessary, they rarely force their leader into that position. When people realize that kindness is a choice, not a weakness, they value it more, not less. This is the paradox Machiavelli discovered. Leaders who are willing to be feared when necessary often find they need to use fear less frequently than leaders who rely solely on being loved. Because when people know you can be dangerous, you rarely need to prove it. Your reputation becomes your weapon, and your restraint becomes your strength. But here's where most people completely miss the point of Machiavellian leadership. They think it's about ruling through intimidation, about crushing dissent, about making people cower in your presence. That's not strategy. That's stupidity. That's the difference between a leader who understands fear and a bully who only knows how to create it. Real power doesn't announce itself. Real power doesn't need to scream or threaten or posture. Real power sits quietly in the corner of the room, and everyone feels it without a word being spoken. Because true fear isn't about what you do. It's about what people believe you're capable of doing if pushed too far. Machiavelli studied this phenomenon obsessively. He watched leaders who thought they could maintain control through endless speeches about their authority. He observed rulers who believed that constant displays of force would keep their subjects in line. He saw how these approaches backfired, how they created resentment instead of respect, rebellion instead of loyalty. The most effective leaders, he discovered, were those who created what he called calculated uncertainty. Not chaos, not unpredictability, but a specific type of psychological tension where people understood the rules clearly, but never quite knew how far they could push before consequences arrived. This uncertainty kept people sharp, kept them thinking, kept them invested in not finding out where the boundaries were. Think about the most respected leaders you've encountered in your life. Not the ones you liked most, but the ones you respected most. Chances are, they had this quality. They didn't need to raise their voice to command attention. They didn't need to make threats to enforce their standards. They simply carried themselves in a way that made it clear they weren't someone to test casually. This is what modern leadership development gets backwards. It teaches people to be more likable instead of more formidable. It focuses on building rapport instead of building respect. It prioritizes emotional connection over psychological positioning. And while these skills have their place, they're useless when you're facing someone who sees kindness as an invitation to exploit you. Machiavelli would look at today's leadership books and laugh. All these techniques for managing up, for building consensus, for creating win-win solutions, these work beautifully when everyone involved is operating in good faith. They crumble the moment you encounter someone who isn't. They assume that all conflicts can be resolved through better communication, that all problems stem from misunderstanding, that all people want essentially the same things. But people don't want the same things. Some people want power over others. Some people enjoy causing disruption. Some people are motivated by envy, by resentment, by the desire to tear down what others have built. You can't love these people into cooperation. You can't inspire them into alignment. You can't negotiate with them in good faith because they're not operating from good faith. These are the people who test every boundary, who interpret every kindness as weakness, who see every compromise as an opportunity to demand more. They don't respond to emotional appeals or rational arguments. They respond to one thing only: the clear understanding that their destructive behavior will cost them more than any benefit they might gain from it. This is why Machiavelli emphasized the importance of swift, decisive action when dealing with threats to your authority. Not because he enjoyed conflict, but because he understood that delayed consequences lose their power. When someone crosses a line and nothing happens immediately, they learn that the line wasn't really there. When they face immediate, proportional consequences, they learn that all the other lines are real too. Most leaders hesitate in these moments. They want to give people the benefit of the doubt. They want to believe that a conversation will solve the problem. They want to avoid being seen as harsh or unreasonable. This hesitation is what Machiavelli called the disease of weak princes. It's the gap between knowing what needs to be done and having the stomach to do it. Because here's what happens when you delay necessary action. The problem doesn't go away. It gets worse. The person pushing boundaries doesn't suddenly develop self-awareness. They push harder. Other people notice your hesitation and begin testing their own boundaries. What started as one manageable issue becomes a systemic breakdown of your authority. The cruel irony is that leaders who try to avoid small conflicts often end up facing much larger ones. Leaders who won't enforce minor consequences find themselves dealing with major crises. Leaders who can't bring themselves to disappoint one person end up failing everyone else who depends on them. This is the mathematics of leadership that Machiavelli understood cold. Every time you fail to act when action is required, you don't just lose credibility with the person who tested you. You lose credibility with everyone who was watching to see what would happen. And they're always watching. They're always measuring your responses, calculating how much they can get away with, deciding whether you're someone who backs up their words with actions. Fear-based leadership isn't about being cruel to everyone. It's about being unmistakably clear about your standards with everyone. It's about creating an environment where good people feel protected and bad actors feel exposed, where those who contribute feel valued and those who detract feel unwelcome, where cooperation is rewarded and exploitation is impossible. When you establish this kind of environment, something interesting happens. The people who belong there thrive. They don't waste energy worrying about office politics or wondering if their work will be valued. They don't have to navigate around toxic personalities or compensate for others who aren't pulling their weight. They can focus entirely on doing their best work because they trust that you'll handle everything else. Meanwhile, the people who don't belong there leave. Not because you drove them out with cruelty, but because they realize they can't operate the way they want to in your environment. They can't manipulate, can't slack off, can't create drama without consequences. So they find somewhere else to go, somewhere with a leader who won't hold them accountable. This is what Machiavelli meant when he wrote about the prince who is both feared and respected. Not someone who terrorizes good people, but someone who makes life impossible for bad ones. Not someone who rules through intimidation, but someone who creates such clear expectations that intimidation becomes unnecessary. The leaders who master this approach discover something profound. They find that they actually need to use their authority less often than leaders who rely solely on being liked. Because when people know you will act decisively when necessary, they rarely force you into that position. When they understand that crossing certain lines will result in swift consequences, most of them never cross those lines. Your reputation becomes your weapon. Your consistency becomes your strength, and your restraint becomes the most powerful tool in your arsenal. Because everyone knows that when you finally do act, it will be decisive, proportional, and final. This is the foundation of true leadership that most people never understand. They think power is something you take from others. But Machiavelli knew better. Real power is something others give you because they recognize you're the only one capable of wielding it responsibly. And that recognition comes not from your kindness, but from your competence, not from your warmth, but from your willingness to make the hard choices they cannot make themselves. Consider the leader who refuses to fire the employee everyone knows is toxic, who won't address the team member who consistently misses deadlines, who allows one person's bad attitude to poison the entire group's morale. This leader thinks they're being compassionate. They think they're giving someone a chance. They think they're avoiding conflict. But what they're actually doing is showing everyone else that their standards mean nothing. that good performance and bad performance receive the same treatment. That being reliable and being unreliable carry the same consequences. The message this sends ripples through the entire organization. High performers start wondering why they work so hard when mediocrity is tolerated. Good people begin looking for environments where excellence is actually valued. The culture slowly rots from the inside because the leader was too afraid of being disliked to do what everyone needed them to do. Machiavelli saw this pattern play out across kingdoms. Princes who couldn't bring themselves to eliminate threats to their rule. Rulers who hoped their enemies would simply change their minds if given enough time. Leaders who believed that showing weakness would somehow inspire loyalty instead of inviting attack. And every single one of them lost their throne to someone who understood what they refused to accept. That strength, not kindness, is what people look for in a leader. That decisiveness, not deliberation, is what they need when facing uncertainty. That someone has to be willing to make the choices others won't make, bear the responsibility others won't bear, and accept the consequences others won't face. This is why fear-based leadership isn't about making people afraid of you personally. It's about making them afraid of the chaos that would exist without you. Afraid of returning to the dysfunction you eliminated. Afraid of losing the stability you provide. They don't fear your presence. They fear your absence. When you remove a toxic person from the team, you're not just solving one problem. You're sending a message to everyone else that their work environment matters to you. That their ability to do their jobs without interference is something you'll protect. That you value the many over the dysfunction of the few. This creates loyalty far deeper than any amount of personal charm ever could. But here's where the psychology gets interesting. Most people won't admit they want a leader who rules through fear. It sounds harsh, authoritarian, almost primitive. They'll tell surveys they prefer collaborative leadership, servant leadership, transformational leadership. All the gentle approaches that sound enlightened and modern. Yet watch what happens when crisis hits. When the company is struggling, when the team is failing, when the organization is in chaos. Suddenly, those same people start looking for someone who can make the hard decisions. Someone who can cut through the politics and fix what's broken. Someone who has the strength to do what needs to be done, regardless of who might be upset by it. In these moments, they don't want a friend. They want a force. They don't want someone who understands their feelings. They want someone who can solve their problems. They don't want empathy. They want effectiveness, and they'll follow whoever can deliver it, even if that person isn't particularly warm or likable, or concerned with making everyone feel included in every decision. This is the paradox of human nature that Machiavelli understood better than anyone. People say they want one thing, but they respond to something else entirely. They claim to value kindness, but they follow strength. They talk about wanting to be heard, but they need someone willing to stop listening and start acting. They insist they want collaboration, but they crave direction. The leaders who recognize this contradiction and adapt their approach accordingly become the leaders people remember. Not necessarily the ones they loved most, but the ones they respected most. The ones who got results when results mattered. The ones who made the tough calls when tough calls were needed. The ones who were strong enough to carry the weight of leadership without collapsing under it. Machiavelli called this quality virtù. Not virtue in the moral sense, but effectiveness in the practical sense. The ability to assess what a situation requires and deliver it, regardless of whether it aligns with your personal preferences or makes you popular with the people involved. It's the difference between being a good person and being a good leader. And sometimes, those two things conflict. The good person wants everyone to be happy. The good leader wants everyone to be productive. The good person avoids difficult conversations. The good leader initiates them before problems escalate. The good person gives people the benefit of the doubt. The good leader gives people clear expectations and consistent consequences. This doesn't mean good leaders are bad people. It means they understand that their personal desire to be liked cannot take precedence over their responsibility to achieve results. That their discomfort with conflict cannot override their duty to address problems. That their preference for harmony cannot supersede their obligation to maintain standards. When you accept this responsibility, when you truly embrace the weight of leadership, something shifts in how others perceive you. They stop seeing you as someone they need to manage, manipulate, or work around. They start seeing you as someone they can depend on to handle the things they cannot handle themselves. Someone who will make the decisions they're afraid to make. Someone who will bear the consequences they're not willing to bear. This shift creates a different kind of relationship between leader and follower. Not based on affection or personal connection, but on competence and reliability. They may not invite you to their birthday party, but they'll follow you into battle. They may not share their personal problems with you, but they'll trust you with their professional future. They may not love you, but they'll respect you. And respect lasts longer than love ever could, because love is fragile. It depends on mood, on circumstances, on whether you're meeting someone's emotional needs at any given moment. Respect is durable. It's based on consistent performance, on reliable judgment, on the track record you build through your actions over time. Love can disappear overnight. Respect has to be lost through repeated failures, through demonstrated incompetence, through a pattern of bad decisions that undermines confidence in your abilities. This is why Machiavelli focused on respect rather than affection as the foundation of sustainable leadership. He understood that leaders who chase popularity often sacrifice effectiveness, that leaders who prioritize being liked often compromise their ability to be useful, that the desire for approval can become a weakness that others exploit to avoid accountability. The most dangerous thing that can happen to a leader is to become so invested in being loved that they stop making necessary decisions. When your need for approval becomes stronger than your commitment to results, you've lost the ability to lead effectively. You become a hostage to other people's emotions, a prisoner of their expectations, someone who can be controlled by anyone willing to withdraw their affection. Machiavelli saw this pattern destroy countless rulers. Princes who couldn't make unpopular decisions, even when those decisions were clearly necessary. Leaders who allowed problems to fester, because addressing them might upset someone. Rulers who let their kingdoms crumble rather than take actions that would damage their reputation for being kind and understanding. The cruelest irony is that these leaders, in trying to be loved by everyone, often end up helping no one. Their refusal to make hard choices means the problems get worse. Their inability to enforce standards means the organization suffers. Their desire to avoid disappointing anyone means they ultimately disappoint everyone who depends on them for leadership. True compassion, Machiavellian compassion, sometimes looks harsh from the outside. It's the compassion that fires the person who's dragging down the entire team. The compassion that implements difficult changes that will hurt in the short term, but help in the long term. The compassion that says no to individual requests that would undermine the greater good. This kind of leadership requires a different type of strength. Not the strength to dominate others, but the strength to disappoint them when necessary. Not the strength to intimidate people into compliance, but the strength to maintain your standards even when everyone is pressuring you to lower them. Not the strength to be cruel, but the strength to be unmoved by manipulation, guilt trips, and emotional appeals that would prevent you from doing what's right. Machiavelli's lesson echoes through centuries because it reveals what most refuse to accept. That leadership isn't a popularity contest. It's a responsibility that demands strength over sympathy, results over relationships, respect over affection. The choice isn't between being good or evil. It's between being effective or irrelevant. Choose wisely, because those who depend on you are watching, and they need a leader, not a friend.